A kitchen knife to the heart, because she asked for half of what they built together over 35 years. A bottle of antifreeze stirred into sweet tea, dose after dose, over the course of a single afternoon. The money was never even real. A flame applied to the bottom corner of a bed, while a deaf, barely mobile 77-year-old woman slept in it. Because the bank had just cut off access to her account. A shotgun retrieved from under a bedroom, 10 seconds between two shots, over a $40 bottle of wine. A 19-year-old who had never verified a single fact about his own father's career, arranged to have both parents shot while they slept. There was no fortune. There was never a fortune. A gold treasure hidden in France since the Second World War that almost certainly never existed. 4 members of one family killed for a legend. 10 cases. 10 families. 10 crimes that answer one question. How much is a life worth to the people who are supposed to love you? The answers in this video will disturb you, because in every single one of these cases, the number is smaller than you would ever believe. $40. $160,000 split from a house. A $40,000 CD cashed out within days. A farm that nobody is left alive to work. Stay with me to the end, because these are not just crime stories. They are the permanent record of what greed does to a family and what it costs everyone who survives it. Family. Before I take you through all 10 of these cases, before I walk you through the knives and the firearms and the antifreeze and the flames and the crowbars and the inheritance fights that outlasted the people they destroyed, we stop, because every case in this video is a real person, a real family, a real wound that in some of these cases took nearly 3 decades to bring to justice, and in others, the justice that came still did not feel like enough. This video is presented for informational and public awareness purposes. All information is drawn from confirmed public records, court documents, law enforcement statements, and verified reporting. Let's pray. Lord, for Kelly, for Oscar and Dena, for the Troadec family, Pascal, Brigitte, Sebastian, Charlotte, for Mark, for Girthy, for Emily, for Stephen, for Anne, for Susan, for Ian and Margaret, for the families who survived these cases and had to watch the legal system decide what their loved one's life was worth in dollars and years and sentencing guidelines. For justice, for truth, for the families who are still waiting on verdicts. Amen. Type Amen. Where are you watching from? Country and city. Drop it below. Subscribe. Because when one of the pending cases in this video has a new development, you want to be here for it. 10 cases. Let's begin. Kelly Fuss, Cobb County, Georgia, June 1999. In 1993, a man named Bill Fuss passed away in Cobb County, Georgia, leaving behind an estate worth nearly $500,000. Rental properties, jewelry, 9 cars, cash. His widow Jackie refused to distribute any of it. And that refusal set off a chain of events that would end with 2 women gone and a family torn apart in ways that no amount of money could ever justify. Oh, the question at the center of this case is simple. How much is a life worth to the people who are supposed to love you? Margaret Fuss Branch was the only biological child among 4 siblings in the Fuss family. The other 3, including David Fuss, were adopted. That distinction mattered deeply to Margaret. She insisted she deserved the entire estate. She was the only one who shared blood with Bill and Jackie. When Jackie was struck down by another adopted son, Charles, in June 1996, the inheritance war exploded into something far worse. Jackie had no will. Margaret was named estate administrator. Over the next 3 years, more than 60 hostile meetings took place between the siblings and their spouses as they fought over every dollar, every car, every piece of jewelry their parents had left behind. 60 meetings. 3 years. 1 family. All. Kelly Denise Lindsay Fuss was 31 years old. She was David's wife. As his spouse, she stood to benefit from whatever share David received. That made her a target. The night of June 15, 1999. On June 15, 1999, Margaret lured David away from the family home on a pretext, giving the others a window to enter the house while Kelly was alone. Margaret, along with David's adopted sister Melissa Fusser and Melissa's boyfriend Joel Lee Demings, entered through the front. Kelly was home unexpectedly. They had not anticipated her being there. She fought back fiercely. She was struck and cut 30 times, 2 of those wounds proving fatal. The phone line had been severed before they entered, meaning Kelly had no way to call for help even as she struggled. David returned 45 minutes later and found his wife on the kitchen floor. The woman he had married was gone, and the people responsible were his own sisters. What investigators found: a detective who had worked Jackie's earlier case recognized the family name immediately, giving investigators a head start. Police found Melissa's white pickup truck parked at the Fuss home, with Melissa and Joel still sitting inside. They had not left the scene. Blood found on Joel's sock matched Kelly's DNA. Witnesses in the neighborhood had seen Kelly's stolen Ford Mustang being dropped just blocks from the residence. Margaret Branch and Melissa accepted 10-year plea deals in September 2000 for burglary and related charges. Joel Dominguez went to trial in March 2001 and was found guilty of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. He received life in prison plus 20 years. The Georgia Supreme Court affirmed his conviction in 2003. Joel Demings was found dead in his cell in February 2018. Margaret Branch was released around 2009. Melissa was released in March 2008. And then, the footnote that made this case even stranger: Melissa and Joel were discovered to be biological siblings, both children of Sandra Cano, the anonymous Mary Doe in the landmark Doe versus Bolton Supreme Court case. $500,000 split 4 ways would have given each sibling roughly $125,000. Instead, one woman is gone. Another spent a decade behind bars. A third served time and was released. And the man convicted of carrying out the act was found dead in a prison cell 19 years later. Margaret orchestrated the plan, received 10 years, and walked free around 2009. David Fuss lost his wife and his sisters in the same night. 1 to a kitchen floor, 2 to handcuffs. The estate that started it all was not even worth $1 million. But the cost of fighting over it was measured in lives, prison sentences, and a family that will never be whole again. Oscar and Dena Muñoz, Clovis, New Mexico, December 2025. While the Fuss case was driven by a real inheritance worth real money, the next one was built on something even more dangerous: an inheritance that existed only in the mind of the person who planned it. On December 15, 2025, at approximately 4:42 in the morning, Oscar Steve Muñoz, 58, and his wife Dena Muñoz, 71, were found in their bed in Clovis, New Mexico. Both had been struck by a single round to the head from a 9mm handgun while they slept. They had just returned from an anniversary trip. Let that sit for a moment. They had just come home from celebrating their marriage, and while they slept in their own bed on the night they returned, their son was inside the same house. Their son Darren, 19 years old, called 911 at 4:50 a.m. to report what he described as a break-in. When officers arrived, nothing about the scene matched the story he was telling. The house was quiet. The doors were intact. Nothing had been taken. And Darren seemed strangely calm for someone who had just discovered intruders had been inside his family's home. Oh, because there were no intruders. There was only Darren. The false premise: Darren Muñoz falsely believed his father owned the Alab's convenience store franchise, rather than merely managing stores for the company. Oscar was an employee, a regional manager, a man who had spent decades working his way up to that position and was proud of it. But Darren was convinced the family was sitting on a fortune, and he plotted for weeks with friends to have both of his parents killed so he could collect what he imagined was waiting for him once they were gone. His friend Julio Zamora, 18, agreed to carry out the act in exchange for a share of the expected windfall. The two had discussed the plan extensively, openly enough that multiple people in their circle knew what was being arranged. They had even considered cutting Oscar's brakes as an alternative, before settling on what they ultimately chose. They purchased a Ghost Glock, an untraceable handgun, assembled from parts, specifically for the job. On the night it happened, Darren left the garage door open so Zamora could walk right in. Where the story fell apart, the staged scene collapsed almost immediately. Nothing was missing from the home. There was no forced entry anywhere on the property. A critical inconsistency emerged during questioning. Darren claimed he heard the garage alarm but somehow did not hear what happened down the hall from his own bedroom in a single-story house. And then, he asked police not to check on his parents, because they slept without clothes. A son who had just called 911 about intruders in his home did not want officers to check on his parents. Within hours, the story unraveled from multiple directions at once. A friend named Brietta Regalado told police the plan had been discussed openly for weeks. His girlfriend Gabriela Dominguez confirmed the entire scheme in detail. Zamora was arrested the same day, with the weapon still in his glove box. He had driven home after the act and left the firearm in his car, as if nothing had happened. He had not attempted to dispose of it or wipe it down. Both Darren and Zamora pleaded not guilty at their arraignment on December 18, 2025. Both were detained pending trial after judges ruled they posed a danger to the community. A grand jury indicted both on all charges. Both face life in prison without parole. Both remain in custody at Curry County Detention Center without bond. Darren's trial is scheduled for January 26, 2027. The inheritance motive was built on a completely false premise. Oscar Steve Muñoz was an employee, not a franchise owner. There was no fortune to inherit. There were no stores to take over. There was no empire waiting for Darren on the other side of what he planned. Two people are gone because a 19-year-old could not be bothered to verify a single fact about his own father's career. Oscar had spent decades working his way up to regional manager. He was not wealthy. The money Darren was chasing never existed. His parents are gone, and he will very likely spend the rest of his life in a cell over nothing. While the Muñoz case was built on a fantasy about American convenience stores, the next one was driven by something even more elaborate. A family legend about wartime gold, hidden somewhere in France. On the night of February 16 to 17, 2017, in the quiet suburb of Orvault near Nantes, France, 4 members of the same family were killed inside their own home while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Pascal Troadec, 49 years old, his wife Brigitte, 49 years old, their son, Sébastien, 21 years old, their daughter, Charlotte, 18 years old. All 4 were struck with a crowbar. Bloodstain analysis later suggested at least 2 of them never woke up. The person responsible was not a stranger. He was family. And the reason he gave for what he did was a treasure that almost certainly never existed. The legend, Hubert Cowassin, 46 years old, a former boilermaker, was the long-term partner of Pascal's sister, Lydie Troadec. According to family lore, Pascal and Lydie's father, Pierre, had supposedly discovered a cache of gold bars and coins in 2006 while renovating a building in Brest. Treasure allegedly connected to Bank of France reserves moved during the Second World War. The story had been passed around the family for years. After Pierre passed around 2009, the family's matriarch accused Pascal of taking the gold for himself. Cowassin became consumed by the belief that Pascal had cheated Lydie out of her rightful share. He watched the family's spending habits from a distance. He monitored their lifestyle for any sign of hidden wealth, looking for new cars, home improvements, holidays, anything that might confirm his suspicion. Psychiatrists who examined him later diagnosed his fixation as a chronic paranoid delusion, a belief so deeply embedded that no amount of contradictory evidence could shake it. Police investigations found no hidden accounts, no gold, no evidence the treasure ever existed at all. It was a family story, nothing more. 300 kilometers. On that night in February, Cowison drove 300 kilometers from his home in Brittany to the Troadec residence in Orvault, and carried out what he had been fixating on for years. Blood stain analysis later suggested at least 2 of the victims never woke up, directly contradicting Cowison's later claim that he had acted in self-defense. Over the days that followed, he and Liddy transported the remains to Cowison's farm in Brittany, where he dismembered them and attempted to destroy the evidence by burning. Investigators would eventually recover 379 pieces of flesh and 2,914 pieces of bone. The victims' skulls were never found. The alarm was raised on February 23rd when Brigitte's sisters noticed a week of silence. No phone calls, no messages, no sign of life from a family of 4. Inside the house, police found blood traces on walls and floors. Stripped beds, mattresses removed, missing electronics, but no bodies. The scene suggested something catastrophic, but without remains, the investigation had no confirmation of what. An anonymous family tip redirected investigators away from initially suspecting Sébastien and toward Cowison. His DNA was found at the home, despite his claim of having had no contact with the Troadec family for years. That single forensic finding contradicted everything he had told investigators. He confessed on March 5, 2017, and led police to the farm. The verdict. At a 3-week trial in June and July 2021, Cowison was found guilty of quadruple murder and sentenced to 30 years, with the court recognizing diminished responsibility due to his paranoid delusion. Liddy Troadec received 3 years, 1 suspended, for concealing remains and altering the scene. Neither appealed the criminal sentences, but Cowison appealed the €450,000 in civil damages awarded to the surviving families. He accepted the prison sentence. He did not want to pay the compensation. That tells you everything about who Hubert Cowison was. 4 lives ended over gold that probably never existed. A family story repeated enough times that one man with a paranoid mind decided it was real. No gold was ever found. No hidden accounts were ever uncovered. Pascal Troadec, his wife Brigitte, their son Sébastien, and their daughter Charlotte are gone, because of a legend about wartime reserves that most likely existed only in the imagination of the people who told the story. The consequences were permanent. The treasure was not. Mark O'Sullivan, County Cork, Ireland, October 2020. While the Troadec case unfolded in secret over days, the next one happened in a matter of minutes, and the people responsible did not even try to escape afterward. On October 26, 2020, at approximately 6:30 in the morning, in the townland of Raheen in Castlemagner near Kanturk, County Cork, Ireland, a 26-year-old law graduate and trainee solicitor named Mark O'Sullivan was struck 7 times as he slept in his own bed. He had his whole career ahead of him. He was the kind of person his community expected great things from. The weapons used were 2 legally held .22 caliber rifles. The people who carried out the act were his own father, Tad O'Sullivan, 59, and his younger brother, Diarmid, 23. When it was over, both of them walked calmly to a nearby field and took their own lives with the same weapons they had just used on Mark. Neither attempted to flee. Neither called for help. The reason behind all of it was a 115-acre farm valued at approximately €2 million, and a dispute over who would inherit it. What the land cost. Anne O'Sullivan, the family matriarch, had inherited the farm from her own parents. In February 2020, she received a terminal diagnosis, making inheritance planning urgent. Anne wanted to divide the land equally between her 2 sons. A fair split. one that would give each of them a working farm and financial security. Diarmuid demanded the bulk of the property, threatening to harm himself if denied. Todd told Anne he had only married her for the land, and warned she would be following 2 coffins into the graveyard if she did not comply with their demands. Despite the pressure, despite the threats, despite knowing what her husband and younger son were capable of, Anne made a will dividing the farm nearly evenly between her sons. She chose fairness. They chose something else entirely. Oh, that morning after the act was carried out, Anne heard what happened from another room. She rushed in. She screamed. Additional rounds were discharged into the room while she stood there. When she tried to call for help, they smashed her phone with a sledgehammer so she could not reach anyone. Diarmuid looked at his mother and told her, "I hope you think the land is worth it now." Investigators later determined they deliberately left Anne alive to suffer and live with the torment of what she had witnessed. They could have harmed her. They chose not to. They wanted her to carry what she had seen for whatever time she had left. Anne's walk. Anne fled barefoot across 500 meters of rough fields and darkness, running over stones and uneven ground in the cold October morning without shoes, to reach neighbors. Girthy established cordons around the property, fearing a possible standoff with armed individuals still on the premises. Mark's body was found at 12:46 in the afternoon. The bodies of Troadec and Diarmuid were spotted by helicopter around 1:30, lying in a field not far from the farmhouse. On Diarmuid's person, a 12-page letter expressing fury over the inheritance was found strapped to his thigh with cling film. He had written his grievances down, sealed them against his body, and carried them to the field where he ended his own life. At the Mallow Coroner's Court inquest on August 4, 2021, the jury returned a verdict of unlawful killing for Mark and self-infliction for Troadec and Diarmuid. The coroner noted there was no one left alive to extend condolences to. Anne had passed from her illness on April 7, 2021, 6 months after the events, having attended all 3 funerals before she went. She buried her son, her husband, and her other son in that order, and then she followed them. Mark had told a friend before that morning that he feared his father and brother would take his life and make it look like he had done it himself. He was right about the threat. He was wrong about the method. They did not try to disguise anything. They wanted Anne to see exactly what they had done. A €2 million farm. A family of 4. Nobody left to live on the land that started the entire thing. The farm still stands in Raheen. The fields are still green, but every person who once called it home is gone. Stop right here. 6 more cases to go, and the weight of what comes next is something different. You are about to hear about a blood stain on a shoe, collected in 1997, and never tested for 26 years. The woman whose DNA was on it was 81 years old. The people who put the stain there were her own relatives. A 21-year-old woman released from hospital after the worst week of her life. Her half-sister and her own fiancé had been planning it while she was admitted. The staging was nearly perfect. For a month nobody questioned it. A man who stirred antifreeze into sweet tea dose after dose over the course of a single afternoon. Because the inheritance he was protecting was a $30 million email scam that never existed. A 77-year-old deaf woman, asleep in her bed. Her daughter-in-law had already drained her bank account. When the bank cut off access, she set the bed on fire. A wife who asked for half of what they had built together over 35 years. A single wound to the heart, and a $40 bottle of wine that started an argument that ended 2 lives, that triggered a $4 million inheritance dispute, and that changed the law. These cases deserve to stay in the light. Subscribe, so that when a verdict comes in on any of the pending cases in this video, you hear it here first. Like, because families like these deserve for their names to stay in the conversation. Share, because someone watching this may know something about one of these cases they do not realize matters. Type subscribed. We keep going. Girthy, Carolina, Sasakwa, Oklahoma, August 1997. A blood stain on a shoe, collected in 1997. Sitting in an evidence locker for 26 years, the DNA was there from the beginning. Nobody looked. On August 11, 1997, in the small town of Sasakwa in Seminole County, Oklahoma, an 81-year-old widow named Girthy, Carolina, was found on her kitchen floor. She had no children of her own. She was known locally as Granny. Everyone in Sasakwa knew who she was. She had been struck and cut multiple times. The injuries classified as stab wounds, incised wounds, and blunt force trauma. She was 81 years old. She lived alone. The people responsible were two of her own relatives, and it would take 28 years for anyone to prove it. The $40,000. In April 1997, just months before her death, Carolina had created a living trust, transferring a $40,000 certificate of deposit and naming her niece Carolyn Foreman, 53, as the beneficiary tasked with distributing the funds among family members. Carolina had been upset with Foreman, accusing her of taking money from her bank account. Just days after Girthy was found, Foreman cashed out the entire $40,000 CD. She did not distribute a cent to anyone else. Oh, Foreman brought a firearm. Her great-niece, Dakota Davis, a teenager at the time, carried a hatchet. Davis threw ammonia in Carolina's face and then struck her repeatedly while Foreman urged, "Hit her again. Hit her again." The two initially told investigators they had arrived for a pre-dawn visit and found their aunt already gone. Their story was suspicious from the start, but the evidence at the time was not enough to charge either of them. Over the years that followed, Davis allegedly confided in multiple people, including her own father, that she had been responsible for what happened to Carolina. But confessions made in private conversations are difficult to prosecute without physical evidence to anchor them. The case went cold. Sasakwa moved on. Girthy, Carolina's name faded from the headlines and from public memory. But the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation held on to the physical evidence collected at the scene in 1997, including shoes recovered from the suspects. The evidence sat in storage for decades, untouched, untested, waiting. 26 years later, the break came in November 2023, 26 years after the crime, when OSBI agents revisited the old evidence as part of a cold case review. Criminalist Constance Lansdale discovered a bloodstain on the side of Davis's shoe that had been collected at the scene in 1997, but never submitted for DNA analysis. When the stain was finally tested using modern techniques, it confirmed a match to Girthy, Carolina. The evidence had been sitting in a storage facility for more than a quarter of a century, collected on the day the crime occurred, never processed, waiting for the day someone cared enough to look at it. Both were arrested on March 4, 2025. Davis was picked up in Sacramento, California, where she had been living for years under the assumption that the case would never catch up to her. Foreman was taken into custody in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Both were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. Davis pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact and received 20 years, 10 in custody, and 10 unsupervised release. Foreman's charges remain pending as of early 2026. She is 81 years old, the same age her aunt was when she was found on that kitchen floor, and she reportedly suffers from dementia. The symmetry is difficult to ignore. $40,000. That is what Girthy, Carolina's life was worth to the people who ended it. And the evidence that proved it was there the entire time, sitting on a shelf, collecting dust, waiting for someone to care enough to test it. February 2023. While the Carolina case took 28 years to solve, the next one was designed to never look like a crime at all. It was staged as something else entirely, and for a while, it worked. On February 17, 2023, 21-year-old Emily Credus was found lifeless in a home in Upper Township, Cape May County, New Jersey. The scene looked like an overdose. Packets of a substance stamped White House were placed on her nightstand. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no obvious injuries. The initial classification was exactly what the people responsible had intended: an accidental overdose. Emily had recently been hospitalized, and her history made the staging believable. For nearly a month, nobody questioned the official explanation. The two people who planned it had every reason to believe they had gotten away with it: the house and the half-sister. Emily and her half-sister Sarah Erickson, 36, shared a mother named Christine Credus who had passed in 2020. Christine left behind a 4-bedroom home to both daughters. Under the terms of the will, if Emily passed, her half reverted to Sarah. The house later sold for $325,000. Erickson blamed Emily for losing custody of her own children. She had previously mentioned multiple times about ending her sister's life by injecting her with a fatal dose. She had talked about it openly enough that people around her knew what she was considering. The question was never whether Sarah wanted Emily gone. The question was when she would act on it. On February 11, 2023, Emily suffered a miscarriage and attempted to take her own life, spending 5 days in hospital. At her most vulnerable, the worst week of her life. While Emily was admitted and at her most vulnerable, Erickson and Emily's own fiancé, Joseph Augustus Reagan I v. 22, devised a plan to end her life and make it look like she had done it herself. They chose the day she was released from hospital. On February 16th, the day Emily came home, Erickson gave her crushed capsules to incapacitate her, then injected her with 10 to 15 bags of a lethal substance between her thumb and index finger. The location was chosen specifically to avoid obvious detection. Reagan held his hand over Emily's mouth and told her, "Take your medicine." He then stayed with her for approximately 7 hours as she slowly faded, her breathing becoming increasingly labored until she stopped at around 6 o'clock in the morning on February 17th. He sat in that room for 7 hours and waited for it to end. Then the packets were staged on the nightstand to complete the scene. Oh, how it unraveled. In March 2023, approximately 1 month after Emily's death, Reagan walked into a police station and voluntarily confessed. He told investigators everything: the planning, the roles, the timeline, the staging. His confession reopened a case that had been closed as an accidental overdose. In April 2024, over a year later, a backpack was turned over to police containing 18 phones, 15 packets matching the crime scene stamps, latex gloves, and a handwritten plan detailing how the act would be carried out. The backpack was a kit, assembled in advance. This was not a crime of opportunity. Erickson's boyfriend Timothy Barreras corroborated Reagan's account in January 2025, providing additional details that confirmed the timeline and the roles each person played. After Emily was gone, Erickson went to court and won a ruling granting her sole rights to all proceeds from the house sale. She collected the money from a home she had helped ensure her sister would never live in again. Both Erickson and Reagan were arrested in January 2025 and indicted on first-degree murder and conspiracy in March 2025. Both are held without bail at Cape May County Jail. No trial date has been set as of early 2026. Emily Credus was 21 years old. She had just been released from the hospital after the worst week of her life. At her most vulnerable, the two people closest to her used that exact moment to carry out what they had been planning. The house sold for $325,000. Split in half, Emily's share was worth roughly $160,000. That is the price they placed on her life. Stephen Riley Jr., Minot, North Dakota, September 2023. While the Credus case was built on a real inheritance staged to look like something else, the next one was built on money that was never real at all. And the person who tried to protect access to it stirred the means of destruction into something as ordinary as a glass of sweet tea. On September 3, 2023, Stephen Edward Riley Jr., 51, of Minot, North Dakota, drove to Minot International Airport, expecting to meet an attorney who would finalize the transfer of a $30 million inheritance from a distant relative. He had been communicating with people online who told him the money was real, that all he needed to do was show up and sign the paperwork. No attorney appeared. No paperwork existed. The $30 million was a classic email inheritance scam, the kind that preys on people who want to believe a life-changing sum is waiting for them just around the corner. Stephen believed it completely. So did his girlfriend of approximately 10 years, Anothea Canoyer, 47. And that shared belief in money that did not exist is what got Stephen killed. Why she did it. Riley's friends told investigators he had planned to break up with Canoyer after receiving the inheritance. Canoyer considered herself his common-law wife and believed she was entitled to a share. When police later informed her that North Dakota does not recognize common-law marriage, she became incensed. She was not going to let a decade-long relationship end with nothing, especially not when she believed millions were about to land. Rather than lose access to money she thought was coming, she decided to make sure Riley never had the chance to leave her behind. On September 3rd, Canoyer mixed ethylene glycol, the active ingredient in antifreeze, into Riley's sweet tea throughout the day. She did not do it once. She added it repeatedly, dose after dose, ensuring the concentration built up in his system over hours. At the airport, when no lawyer appeared and Riley began feeling ill, dizzy, stomach pain, appearing intoxicated without having consumed alcohol, his friends grew alarmed and wanted to take him to a hospital immediately. Canoyer insisted it was heat stroke and blocked every attempt to get him medical attention. She stood between Riley and the people trying to help him, telling them he was fine, telling them he just needed rest, telling them there was no reason to involve doctors. Oh, had anyone overruled her and taken Riley to an emergency room that afternoon, he would almost certainly have survived. Ethylene glycol poisoning is treatable if caught early, but Canoyer made sure no one caught it. By September 4th, Riley was unconscious. He was airlifted to Bismarck. He passed on September 5th, the statement that ended her. Before anyone told Canoyer that Riley had passed, and before any lab results existed, she told hospital staff he had been poisoned with antifreeze. Nobody had mentioned antifreeze. Nobody had tested for it yet. No doctor had suggested it. She named the exact substance before anyone else in the building knew what it was. That statement became the centerpiece of the investigation. Riley's friends immediately contacted police. Multiple witnesses reported Canoyer had previously discussed poisoning Riley with antifreeze in conversations before the act, meaning this was not a spontaneous decision. A search warrant at their home revealed a Coors Light bottle, a plastic mug, and an old Windex bottle filled with bright green liquid, all testing positive for ethylene glycol. Canoyer eventually admitted putting antifreeze in Riley's sweet tea with intent to kill him. She was arrested on October 30, 2023. She pleaded guilty on May 29, 2024. Sentenced on October 16, 2024 to 50 years total, 25 to serve and 25 suspended, plus 10 years of supervised probation. She is incarcerated at the Dakota Women's Correctional Facility. Estimated release date, January 2045. She will be in her 70s before she is eligible to walk out. The $30 million never existed. It was an email scam. Stephen Riley Jr. was a father of 5 sons. He was taken over money that was never real, by the person who was supposed to love him, with antifreeze stirred into sweet tea on a September afternoon in North Dakota, Nottinghamshire, England, December 2021. While Riley's case involved a substance slipped into a drink, the next one involved something even more direct: a flame applied to a bed while an elderly woman slept in it. On December 15, 2021, in the early hours of the morning in Newark, Nottinghamshire, a fire broke out in the bedroom of a bungalow belonging to 77-year-old Elizabeth Ann Vamplou, known to her family as Anne. She was chronically ill with a lung condition. Deaf. Barely mobile. She could not have started the fire herself, and she could not have escaped it on her own. Firefighters pulled her from the blaze. She passed in hospital from severe burns and smoke inhalation. The person who set the fire was her own daughter-in-law. Karen Vamplou, 43, served as Anne's informal carer, and for 8 months she had been systematically draining Anne's bank account. The account and the deadline. Karen had access to Elizabeth's bank account. Over 8 months, she had taken it from £27,000 down to 15, despite Elizabeth's pension income continuing to flow in every month. The money was going out faster than it was coming in, and Karen was the only person with access. She had secret debts exceeding £10,000 that she had not told her husband Mark about, and had been using Elizabeth's account to service those debts while Elizabeth sat in her bungalow unaware. The day before the fire, a bank visit revealed that a transaction limit had been imposed on Elizabeth's account after the bank noticed the pattern of withdrawals. The tap had been turned off. Under Elizabeth's will, Karen's husband Mark stood to inherit half his mother's estate, including the bungalow she owned outright. With the bank account drained and access blocked, there was only one asset left. As prosecutor Peter Joyce KC stated at trial, the victim was no longer of use to the defendant. Only a burden. The night of December 15th, in the early hours, Karen disabled her phone's location function, so her movements could not be tracked. She drove to Elizabeth's bungalow. She applied a naked flame directly to the bottom corner of Elizabeth's bed, while the deaf woman slept above her, unaware of what was happening beneath. CCTV footage from a neighboring property captured Karen running from the bungalow after setting the fire. She drove home, changed out of her dark clothing into pajamas to make it look like she had been in bed the whole time. Then drove back to the bungalow, activated Elizabeth's lifeline pendant, and called emergency services as if she had just discovered the fire. The woman who started it was the same woman who called for help to put it out. Fire investigators conducted controlled experiments proving the blaze could not have been started by any accidental cause. Only direct flame application to the bedding could have produced the burn pattern found at the scene. CCTV records proved Karen made 2 separate visits to the bungalow that night, contradicting her statement that she had only come once. And on Karen's phone, investigators found a Google search about smoke alarms from the afternoon before the fire. She had researched how the alarm system worked before going to set the blaze. After a 4-week trial at Leicester Crown Court, Karen was found guilty of murder on May 17, 2024. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years, making her ineligible for parole until approximately 2056. She will be 75 years old before she can even apply. The judge described it as a killing for gain and said Elizabeth must have woken to find her bed on fire. Flames, smoke, an inferno, and called it hell. Oh, Elizabeth was deaf. She could not hear the fire. She could only feel it. Karen Vamplou drained her mother-in-law's account to £15. And when the bank cut off her access to the last of the money, she set the bed on fire while the woman slept in it. The bungalow she helped destroy was the very asset she was trying to unlock through the will. Susan Workman, Edgeworth, Lancashire, England, April 2011. While Vamplou's case was about a daughter-in-law who saw her mother-in-law as a burden, the next one involved a husband who saw his wife's divorce settlement as something worth preventing at any cost. In April 2011, in the village of Edgeworth in Turton, Lancashire, England, 55-year-old Susan Margaret Workman was struck once in the heart with a kitchen knife. The wound was fatal. She was a mother of 3 sons, Grant, Ben, and Nicholas. She had spent 35 years married to Ian G. Workman, a multi-millionaire car dealer who owned the IGW dealership group and had built a considerable fortune over the course of their marriage. Susan had recently initiated divorce proceedings against Ian. His fortune was estimated at approximately £3 million. Under English law, she stood to receive roughly £1.5 million half the marital assets. Rather than accept the division and move on with the substantial wealth he would still retain, Ian took her life. He claimed at trial that it was self-defense during a domestic argument. The jury heard the evidence, considered his account, and rejected it entirely. Ian Workman was convicted at Preston Crown Court in December 2011 and sentenced to life with a minimum term of 17.5 years, ineligible for release until at least 2029. The fight that never ended. What followed the verdict was one of the most prolonged and aggressive post-conviction inheritance battles in modern British legal history, fought from inside a prison cell. Susan's sons Ben and Nicholas, along with Susan's sister Carolyn Forrester as estate executor, applied the forfeiture rule, the legal principle that prevents a person from profiting financially from the life they have taken. The rule exists precisely for cases like this one. In 2013, the court awarded the family £1.5 million. Ian refused to comply. He transferred his remaining assets to his eldest son Grant, who had sided with his father throughout, in an attempt to shield the money from the court. The Court of Appeal upheld the ruling and ordered Ian to pay the £1.5 million plus £500,000 in legal costs, finding what the judges described as a persistent failure to comply with court orders amounting to flagrant contempt. Even from behind bars, Ian Workman fought every ruling, challenged every order, used every legal mechanism available to keep the money away from the sons who had lost their mother because of him. Ian also unsuccessfully sued his former solicitors for negligence, claiming they had denied him a fair chance at his original trial. The High Court dismissed the claim as an abuse of process. And then, in a detail that captured the absurdity of the entire saga, Ian managed to win a £310,000 VAT battle with HMRC from his jail cell via video link. He lost the fight to keep his freedom. He lost the fight to keep his wife's share of the estate. He lost every attempt to shield his assets from the court. But he won a tax dispute with the government from behind bars. The contempt he showed for Susan in life continued from prison without interruption. Ian Workman remains incarcerated. He is not eligible for release until 2029 at the earliest. Susan was a mother of 3 sons. She wanted a divorce and half of what was rightfully hers after 35 years of marriage. She received a single wound to the heart instead. The money Ian fought so hard to keep will outlast him. Susan will not. December 2014. And then there is the final case on this list. A case that involves a son, a bottle of wine, and a legal outcome that left the victim's surviving daughter asking how her brother could be rewarded for what he did. On December 3, 2014, in the small mining town of Cobar in New South Wales, Australia, 71-year-old Ian Settree confronted his 46-year-old son Scott about a $40 bottle of wine that Scott had taken from the house without asking. A small thing, the kind of disagreement that happens in homes every day, but this home was not like every other home. An argument escalated rapidly. Scott attempted to choke his father. When 69-year-old Margaret Settree intervened and told Scott to leave, he went to his bedroom, retrieved a loaded 12-gauge pump-action shotgun hidden under his bed, and struck Margaret at close range. When Ian rushed in, Scott struck him twice. The time between the 2 shots was approximately 10 seconds. Ian and Margaret Settree had been married for 53 years. Both were gone in a matter of moments. Scott Settree had moved back in with his parents in Cobar after a failed marriage. He was unemployed, consumed alcohol heavily, used substances, and had grown increasingly hostile and unpredictable over time. He had struck his mother on multiple occasions before that night. The situation in the household had deteriorated to the point where Ian and Margaret were living in fear of their own son, but felt unable to remove him. Ian had confided to Scott's sister Wendy Robinson that he felt like a prisoner in his own home. He was 71 years old and afraid of his own son. When interviewed by police after the events, Scott said he felt relieved and free, that he had had enough of mom and dad. He expressed no remorse. He expressed no grief. He said he felt free. The verdict and the inheritance fight. At Double Supreme Court in August 2016, two psychiatrists diagnosed Scott with paranoid schizophrenia. A special verdict of not guilty by reason of mental illness was returned on both counts. He was sentenced to 18 months for firearms possession and ordered detained indefinitely as a forensic patient. The verdict meant he had no criminal record for what he had done to his parents. And then came the inheritance fight, which in many ways became as painful for the surviving family as the act itself. Ian and Margaret's wills divided their estate, worth approximately $4 million, including superannuation and life insurance, equally between Scott and Wendy. Because the not guilty verdict meant Scott had no criminal conviction, the forfeiture rule did not automatically apply. Scott stood to inherit roughly $2 million for killing the people whose money it was. Wendy applied to the New South Wales Supreme Court under the Forfeiture Act to block him. In the ruling known as Settree Estates 2018, Justice Lindsay ruled that the forfeiture rule should apply, but ordered $100,000 set aside in restricted trusts for Scott's ongoing care. The legal battle cost the estate over $300,000. Wendy described the outcome bitterly. My brother was awarded $250,000 for killing my parents. Wendy Robinson campaigned for years to change the law. Her advocacy contributed to the passage of the Mental Health and Cognitive Impairment Forensic Provisions Act 2020 in New South Wales, which replaced the phrase not guilty by reason of mental illness with act proven but not criminally responsible. The change was partly symbolic, but it mattered to families like the Robinsons, who felt the old wording erased what had been done. Scott Settree remains detained as a forensic patient at the Long Bay Jail Forensic Hospital in Sydney, with no criminal record for what happened that night. A $40 bottle of wine, 2 lives, a $4 million inheritance dispute, and a change in the law. Ian and Margaret Settree were married for 53 years. They spent their final moments in the place where they were supposed to be safest, taken by the person they had given a roof to when nobody else would. 10 cases, 10 families. A woman cut 30 times in her own kitchen over an estate fight that had been simmering for 6 years. 2 parents shot in their sleep over a convenience store franchise their son had never verified his father actually owned. A family of 4 in France killed for a treasure that almost certainly never existed. A young man struck 7 times in his bed, while his mother ran barefoot across rough fields in the dark to find help. A blood stain on a shoe, sitting untested for 26 years, that finally broke a cold case open. A 21-year-old released from hospital at her most vulnerable, killed by her own sister and her own fiancé, staged to look like something else. A father of 5, poisoned with antifreeze, stirred into sweet tea, over money that was never real. A deaf elderly woman, asleep in her own bed, while her daughter-in-law set it on fire below her. A woman who asked for half of 35 years of marriage and received a single wound to the heart. 2 parents in a small Australian town, gone in 10 seconds, over a $40 bottle of wine. These are not just crime stories. They are the permanent record of what greed does when it is given a family to work on. Of what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you begin to calculate what your life is worth. And in every single one of these cases, that number was smaller than it should have been. It was always smaller than it should have been. Kelly, Oscar and Dena, Pascal, Brigitte, Sebastien, Charlotte, Mark, Girthy, Emily, Stephen, Anne, Susan, Ian and Margaret. Type every name you remember from this video. Right now, in the comments, type your country and city. Type Amen for every family that survived these cases and had to keep going. For every victim whose name deserves to be remembered. For every case in this video that still has a verdict pending, and for the families waiting on it. Subscribe. Because when one of these cases goes to trial, when a verdict comes in, when a sentence is handed down, you want to be in this room. Family, I love you. Every single one still watching, still asking, still refusing to let these names fade. 10 cases, 10 families, one question that never had a good answer. How much is a life worth? More than this. Always more than this. Keep going. Keep going. I'll see you in the next one. God bless. I'm Marcus Webb, and if you're new here, subscribe and join us. Like, share, and be part of the family.